Hello, everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Akin. I am your host, Olivia Akin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Emily Purry. Emily is the founder and owner of Purry Consultants, where she spearheads initiatives to develop and bolster DEIA programs for companies and organizations. Specializing in disability advocacy, Emily brings a unique perspective to her work, ensuring that inclusivity is at the forefront of every endeavor. With a deeply personal perspective, her unique approach strives to improve employee recruitment and retention and to increase customer loyalty. But Emily's dedication doesn't stop there. Beyond the boardroom, she's a passionate advocate for disability rights in her community. Whether speaking to large audiences or providing individual coaching, Emily tirelessly champions for those facing barriers to a better life. You can find Emily on LinkedIn by searching Emily Purry MS or by going to her website, purryco.com, or searching on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, Purry Consultants. Hello, Emily. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being on, and I'm so excited for the conversation we're going to have today and really dive in because this is something I'm very passionate as well. And I think a lot of people don't think about it in the same light that they should. So let's kick it off. To start off the show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Emily Purry?
Success really has changed over the years, but I think at this point in my life, success is happiness. It's not a dollar amount. It's not all the things I want or own. It's happiness and whatever that brings, however that looks for you. Right now in my life, it's running a successful business that pays my bills and allows me to raise my kiddos and travel and go surfing. So those are my keys to success right now.
And I love how you really highlighted that success could change because that is one thing that I really try to highlight that is okay and that should happen. So that brought a big smile to my face when you said that because I think it is always true and happiness can shape and change the way we look at success so much and so frequently when we enter different chapters in our life as well. But it's
Oh, yeah.
staying true to the core things we love, like surfing in your case, and then growing as maybe we have children and different aspects as well. Emily, I want to start off with your journey into the DEIA space, particularly focusing on disability inclusion. It's in, which is very intriguing because when a lot of people think of DEIA, they don't necessarily think of disability and inclusion of people who have different disabilities, especially ones that you might not be able to just notice by looking at someone. And so, can you dive deeper into your personal experiences that motivated you to prioritize this area of work? And how did those experience influence creating your own business?
Yeah. So I personally am legally blind. I've had macular degeneration since I was a kiddo. I have Stargardt's macular degeneration. So that's a progressive eye disease that slowly but surely my central vision is deteriorating. So I have stronger vision in the peripheral of my eyes, but even that's not super great. And so I have had that experience all my life. And because it's progressive, when I was a kiddo, it was a lot easier to fake that I didn't have any sight issues or a disability. And then as I've gotten older, that has become harder and harder to fake on a regular basis. In college, I could still read college size, like normal size textbooks and that kind of stuff, but it was a struggle. It was a big struggle. And I definitely should have been using my large print or audiobooks more than I did. But now I can't even do that. So reading and driving are probably the two biggest things that are the hardest thing for myself right now. In 2018, I did get a guide dog because my vision was deteriorating to the point where elevation changes were getting really difficult, which obviously stairs and curves can be, a danger. So because I've lived in this experience all my life, it was something that I never thought I would do work in, which is also interesting. Always said when I was a kid, I wasn't going to be that person with a disability who was advocating for people with disabilities. But as I got older and I was really trying to change career fields and get into I guess, the more sedentary, desk jobs. And I couldn't get hired and I was not treated well. And I would get through all the rounds of interviews until I got the in-person interview. And then because when I look at folks, it often is to the left because my central vision is less than my peripheral. And I don't do that consciously. I know how to fake it, but I don't intentionally do that. Um, it made people uncomfortable. And so, I think people noticed at that point. So I had my master's degree and I could not get an entry level job anywhere. And so what drove me to do this work and educating companies and organizations and keynote speaking and all of the things is I didn't want anybody to experience what I did inside the workplace. Life outside the workplace is hard enough, but when we want to be employed, when we want to feel like we belong in a workplace, when we want to get hired and have that same experience that employment brings to every other human, um, I knew I needed to change that. And so educating the workforce was where I began my journey. I started my own business. And of course, 2020, I was laid off from my nonprofit. And so I said, well, I started it over there. Now I'll start it here. So yeah, that's kind of where my journey began.
And I think sometimes life happens to us, like, you said in 2020, when you had a decision to make, either look for a new job or dive all into this. And
Yeah.
it was kind of the fork in the road where you're like, okay, I know I could do it. I'm just going to go for it.
Mhm.
But I also love how you mentioned in your story the aspect of growing up with a disability that for you is something you face your whole life. It's just a part of your everyday routine. Going, I'm not going to be that person that is talking about disabilities or rights and what is right versus wrong when I grow up. And here you are doing it. But I think when you have something that makes you different to everyone else, whether it's a disability or whatever it might be, it can become a superpower that truly fuels who you are. And whether we like it or not, it becomes part of our story and journey and our work. Being diagnosed with epilepsy at a young age, fast forward many years for me, I kind of had the same thing in school or colleges where work, once someone found out, it was like this taboo thing. And like they can know me for months and not have any inclination because I wasn't having a seizures. If
Yeah.
I ever did, they wouldn't be what you would see on TV. And it was just like, I might get them, I was prone to migraines. Um, and so if I needed to take a day off because I really wasn't sick, they'd be like, well, why are you out for a migraine? And I'm like, it's very different. And all these other things can happen. And so it was like prepping like that. But the second someone found out I have epilepsy, they
Mhm.
go, oh,
Yeah.
and it was like totally different light. And I'm like, I've been the same exact person, but now you put a label on it and it's very different. So, to your point of saying, okay, I'm never going to do this, I always said epilepsy is a part of my story, but it's not who I am. And when I got asked to do my TED talk, I was given, uh, they really wanted me to focus on my epilepsy journey
Yeah.
and that piece of my story. And because the topic was resiliency and all this other things. And I said, my story isn't just about who I am as an individual because I have epilepsy.
Yeah.
That's just the piece that has shaped us. And the
Yep.
second you stop looking at it as this is who you are because you have this. There's a much different perspective and clarity on just how it could be a piece of you. So I really love that story because it does really demonstrate how it's a piece of your journey and it gave you a perspective no one else
Yeah.
has to really go, okay, how can we build the bridge?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the biggest piece that I teach on a regular basis. So many people have questions about people with disabilities. And in my trainings, I phrase it as the 6-year-old questions. And when I'm talking about this, a lot of the questions come down to how would you treat any human first? Like, we are still human. And a lot of people get so distracted by the disability that they forget how they act around humans. And then you add in the perspective of having blindness or whatever the case may be. But it comes down to getting to know the human. And I think that's one of the most frustrating things, especially inside the workplace, is that people want to get to know Emily the blind girl, not Emily the mother or the surfer or all the other things that I bring to the table. But the curiosity of human beings want to know about the disability more than the human. And then they're like, oh, wait, she's cool. I want to get to know the human too. But it's like, talk to me and then you'll find out about my disability versus the opposite. Find out about my disability, you'll get to know the human. And that's, yeah, like you said, it's like, it's so much of how I know it shaped me. I know I've had to work harder than most people for everything. I know I have to be more creative than everyone else. I know I have to be a problem solver, like all of those things because of my sight. But that's not the only thing about me. That's me. So yeah, I totally get it.
And I love how you mentioned too the fact that you have to work harder because a lot of people don't see that. And
Mm,
sometimes when certain situations have given you certain grace, they go
mhm.
get that because of this. No, I use the example when I was in school and I still use it to this day of what takes you 2 hours to learn will take me six just because I
Mhm.
take 30 minutes more than you to potentially take an exam.
Yeah.
I had a 504 and IEP growing up, so I
Yeah.
was a limited time. And I was like, but just because I have a limited time isn't meaning I'm gonna do way better than you. It's because even to comprehend the questions and really pull back the information and retain that can take me triple the amount of time. And so
Right.
just reading it. And so it's even those small things that I think how you deliver information, and you mentioned that as well in everyday workplaces, can be instrumental in how someone actually receives it and retains it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
For you, how do you walk into an organization, you know, with your consultant company and someone's now hired you on? What are some of the initial things you do to kind of try to debunk any myths that people might have? And really, where's the first place you start with the group of people?
Ooh, that's a big question. I think the first thing I have to recognize is the privilege I have in this space, being a white, cisgender, blonde haired, blue eyed, straight woman. I hold a lot of privilege in the space. Now, if I didn't look like I do, if I had less sight than I do, I think I know I would be treated much differently. And so, yes, I take my privilege that I do have and I use it to my advantage to open people up. People feel less awkward with me because I look and sound and have that appearance of being more like them. I mean, and I'm talking in general to, dominant culture, especially here in Oregon. But folks tend to be more comfortable with me, and I definitely use that to my advantage. And then they know I have a disability, but then I start talking about surfing and going camping and having kids and the same struggles that they have. And so it's really building the bridges with the things they can relate to, because then that gets them to see the humanity of me. Then once they're open to that piece, then they start saying like, oh, okay, Emily can't read the menu. Or like if we're at a meeting, then they help me out. But because they know me as a human, it's not a big deal. Whereas if I lead with my disability, people get real freaked out. People get real scared to do and say the wrong thing, which is why I'm so passionate about educating companies and organizations, because once you just break down the discomfort or the awkwardness that you have as the individual, not the person with a disability, they've lived in this body all their life. And it's the awkwardness comes when you start acting weird. And
Mhm.
so once we can break through that, then people open up to the concept of, oh, so I really just need to, maybe read Emily a menu every once in a while. I might need to read what's on the PowerPoint if somebody hasn't sent it ahead of time. Like, especially in the workplace, there's very few things that I need help with if the workplace is accessible, which is a whole nother conversation. But you'll get to know those things. Like the people who are close to me just sit down at the table with me and they immediately start reading the menu. And that's because they've been with me enough. It's not awkward, it's not uncomfortable, it's normal to them. And so it's just breaking through those discomforts and the not knowing, and really coming from the lens of not shaming folks for where they're at in their disability journey. I think that's the other thing I bring to the training space is it's okay that you don't know, because you most likely you've never been through a disability awareness training. Most likely you have not been surrounded by people in the workplace with disabilities, not because they're not there, but because they probably haven't disclosed, or it's a non-apparent disability, or all these other things. Um, and so your lack of knowledge is, in my opinion, not entirely your fault. Yes, get to know people. Yes, do some research. Yes, all of those things. And you want to be able to learn how to interact with the human with a disability. And so that's where I come in, and I try to break through some of that awkwardness. I try to answer some of those questions that are like, do I help somebody across the street? Do I push somebody up the ramp in their wheelchair? Like all the things that I get on a regular basis. And so once that foundation is laid, people start to feel comfortable enough to explore the idea of disability and explore the questions that they have. And from there, then we're able to build foundations. And once that seed is planted, the growth of accessibility in a workplace launches, because those seeds were able to be planted and nourished and understood. Then they see it everywhere. People see like, oh wow, that's not accessible. Wow, this cube, nobody could come in here if they were using a wheelchair. Oh my gosh. And it just starts to occur to them because we've started that awareness building.
And I think some of the things you mentioned, and one of them I want to really focus on at this moment, is the aspect of just because you don't know someone has a disability within the workplace doesn't mean they don't have one. I was told when I was in college from people I worked with and were helping me get jobs, don't disclose you have
Oh
a
yeah.
disability. Like, just don't. They're going to read that. They're going to misinterpret it. Every job I had prior to them getting to know me and filling out all the paperwork and applying for
Yeah.
a job. Right now, I own my own business, so it's different. But before I own my own business, if you looked at any of the HR filings that I filled out
Oh yeah.
from the time I was an intern till I left, none of them say I have epilepsy.
Nope.
None of them document it until I felt comfortable enough to tell someone, because and if you look at my HR paperwork, I'm pretty sure only one organization, and it was when I worked at the New York Giants, they put it in the paperwork once I disclosed it so that, like, if anyone looked, they would know. But when I worked at Lockheed Martin, even
Yeah.
though I told my boss after a while, like, this isn't sitting right. Like, I'm feeling this way. I just want to tell you, like, this is my story. This is why it might be taking me longer to get you the work, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of data in here and it's taking me longer to comprehend.
Yeah.
it was still not written. So if you looked at the paperwork, no one would know except my boss, who's going, okay, now I should give her some leeway because she will get me the work and she will deliver, but it might take her 2 hours. So after an hour, I shouldn't ask her
Yeah.
what's going on. Um, but it really is, unless it's been needed. I joke as someone who loves Disney and goes to Disney a lot. I use their DAS system.
Yeah.
And people say to me, they're like, I might go with a group of people and always friends. And they're like, Olivia, you never really talk about epilepsy like needing assistance. But yet you're getting your DAS. And I know this is also a hot topic in the news right now because they're changing their DAS system. And I go, but I don't sweat. And in a building that's air conditioned, that's fine.
Yeah.
That won't trigger anything.
Yeah.
However, if you're standing in 90 something degree weather and can't necessarily get water or food and you're getting dehydrated and
Yeah.
your body can't sweat, you're just going to overheat and pass out. So you
Yeah.
need to be able to navigate lines and get out and be able to eat and be able to do all these things at a different pace. So it does help me. I need to let them know because also then if anything happens, they could scan your magic band and they know
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
And so I think unless you're pushed in environments like that where Disney created it, where it is a plus, like, hey, nothing's going to put you aside from the people who are enjoying this. Just let us know. You don't really, no one is looked at. And Emily, I'd love to get your opinion of this of like, you don't feel necessarily comfortable because everyone else is telling you, don't disclose this. And so then you go, okay, I won't disclose it because I want to be able to get the job. And then, like you said in your journey, you get to that in person part and there's more difficulty. Or then people go, well, you don't have that, like no one really has these issues. No, we're not creating the space where it's comfortable to talk about it and feel like you can write it on a piece of paper because you're sitting there going, okay, well, how am I going to handle this if I bring them on?
Yeah. And that's something I coach more people on than anything is when to, or if not to disclose. And I personally was told, do not ask for anything you don't need until after your probation or you'll be let go. I've been told that. And with a sight condition, that's real hard to fake. But I was able to ask for the minimum that I possibly could from a manager who was, good about it until after my probation. And then I asked for, my larger monitor and all the things. And the thing, yeah, it's hard because then if they're like, well, you didn't ask for it before, why do you need it now? Then there's that whole thing of you're not disabled enough, or you just want special treatment, or you just want, the perks when they're good, like at Disneyland. It's like you want those, but you don't need anything any other time, or it's just all this mind. I don't know a better word.
Oh, I know the word you're gonna say. It's the mind games, but there's probably another word Emily wants to
Yeah,
say.
that's what
I
I was
understand of what
thinking
she's
of the other word. But yes, mind games that you play with yourself of like, do I need it? Do I have to have it? Do I disclose? Can I figure it out? Can I fake it? Can I I mean, it's in every situation. It's in work. It's in, like you said, Disneyland. It's in shoot, I'm recently single and dating. Do I tell people? Do I not? If I tell them before I meet them, will they think I can't see anything and then they won't want to date me? And will it, it's like this constant battle inside our heads, let alone what all y'all are thinking outside there. It's just this constant. It's just like, just get to know me, get to know what I need and don't need, get to know when I need things or don't need things, or trust that I know these things and I will tell you when I need them or not. And that's the biggest piece. It's like people, you don't have to assume and you don't have to know. Learn, let the person, and I think that's a big piece, like you said, Olivia, is like we also have to feel comfortable advocating for ourselves. And because, like you were saying, people told you not to disclose. we do need to normalize that conversation of disclosing. And that's why I'm hoping from the work I do on the corporate side of, yes, there's laws for ADA. Yes, there's all this scary, you're going to get sued if you don't do X, Y, and Z. But for just a moment, I try to come from the humanity lens of, if somebody walks in your doors that has a disability and is already terrified that they need a job, they want a job, they know they have to disclose or not disclose at some point, and they're terrified, just as terrified as you are to not know what you're doing. They're just as terrified to disclose. And if we can look at it from the humanity lens, not the legal lens, not, I mean, legal lens is important, so don't let me disvalue that. But from the humanity lens of, one human is coming in very vulnerable and needs things and is a great employee and is most likely more loyal than a lot of your employees. It's a harder worker than a lot of your employees. And if they're felt to be comfortable and like they belong and they're welcomed there and that you're willing to try and figure this out, that in itself makes the experience 10,000 times better. And so that's what I focus on in a lot of my trainings, is how we can make people feel more welcomed, not pull out the ADA rule book and start quoting every law that's on the books. No, yes, we need to abide by the laws. Definitely. But how can you treat a human being when they come through that door? And that's what's most important to me.
And I think that is really important. And I think that until or unless you have a disability, you don't know the value that brings to the
Mhm.
person across the room or across the table from you. And whether they tell you it or not, it's a very different outlook when
Mhm.
someone doesn't respond with a negative, or how's this going to affect me, or a comment that is a stereotypical comment based on your disability, instead of, how can I best help you? What do you need from me? Comments like that, until you're that person that has to have that hard conversation and say, this is who I am.
Yeah.
Um, you don't know how much that person's going to appreciate it. And so
Yeah. No.
for you, how in your trainings, how do you build your trainings to really make it inclusive and have those hard conversations and make the room feel comfortable enough that, like, we're on this together, we're going to have the conversations, and we're going to become more inclusive and understanding after this?
I think for me, what I try to do is really start with an open, like I said, non-judgmental space. I'm going to break down the basics and not assume that anybody knows pretty much anything. I mean, because I use this platform of 6-year-old questions, and it allows people to ask the questions that they should have been able to ask when they were 6 years old, learning about disabilities, learning about different how people navigate the world differently. But because our parents and our grandparents were like, don't look, don't stare, don't point, don't ask, that's rude. All these things that shut down those questions. We're now adults here in these bodies that are truly 6 years old inside when it comes to learning about disability. And so I start my classes with that. Like, I know you all have questions that you are embarrassed to ask. And I know you should know those answers in order to start building your foundations of understanding around disability. And so just that in itself is like, I know they're there. I know it can be awkward. I, as a person with disability, might not understand somebody else's disability. And I might have questions that I don't know. And I'm embarrassed to ask them as well, because we are all humans. And so that foundation right there is usually like, okay, let me start thinking about those questions that I wanted to ask. Then I start from like what a lot of people struggle with in all minority communities is language. Are we calling people disabled or people with disabilities, or differently abled, or dis with a little d, a capital A ability? Like, what do we say? How do we say it? What are we supposed to say? What aren't we supposed to say? And language changes constantly, and so people are nervous that they're saying the wrong thing. And so being able to assure people that it's okay. And if you screw up, because you will, when you screw up, it's okay. And we're going to learn how to overcome that and not further dig yourself into the hole. We're going to learn how to push through that discomfort and not just let all the word vomit fly out of our mouth. We're going to learn how to get comfortable with the uncomfortable and really just be present and keep moving forward and maintain the relationship in front of us. And so, my general demeanor, no matter where I am, I'm very chill, I'm very real, I'm very relaxed, I'm open. I am one of those people who's able to take the hard questions, especially if they're hurtful, and be able to, manage my emotions around them and not snap back or get angry for the most part. Because I do truly want people to learn. I want people to understand, and I want them to feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable with their questions. And most people do want to do better. They just have never been had the opportunity to learn about disability in the way that I can teach them. So
And I think that's so important, especially with the understanding that, like, no matter how much you try, at some point you're going to mess up on a term or how something comes across. And, from my personal experience, and Emily, I'd love to hear your insight. Like, you don't offend me when that happens. Now, if you're far left or far right, I might go, okay, that's a little bit of ignorance. I know where the line is. Like, you're just saying
yeah,
that because of, especially with epilepsy, we'll use that as an example. Um, the only real seizures people know of are grand mal, which
yeah,
is the shaking, the foaming, the falling, right? Most people don't have grand mal. There's
no,
also acute seizures and different levels of seizures to a point where actually a lot of people, and some of whom never get diagnosed, they're staring events. You get taught at a young age, oh, they're just staring into space. Well, it could be you're having a seizure and no one knows to be on the lookout for that.
yeah.
So sometimes I'm like, okay, you're asking me if I could look at strobe lights.
Oh,
Because I get a lot of those, like, oh, can you go into a club? Like,
yeah,
and
yeah,
this and that. And I'm like, you do realize one way they see how long you can last without having a seizure is putting a strobe light and like going, okay, don't blink. And I'm like, so I can stare at a strobe light way longer than you could probably stare at a strobe light for. Let alone be in the room.
yeah,
So like that's my joke. And sometimes I'm like, okay, I understand that's just coming from a place of
yeah,
what television is thinking, and you think it's okay to have that conversation with me, but I'd rather you have the conversation than go and like go, oh, she can't be in the room. Like we can't
yeah.
have this.
No,
When in
yeah,
reality, it's very different. And so for me, I'd much rather you come up and ask me the question and go, okay, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but like, this is what I'm thinking, or however it might go, and let me correct you,
yeah,
than not having the conversation at all.
yeah. No, I think the big thing that I teach folks is, especially because I mostly work in the workplace.
Yes.
So my big thing is, do you need to know? Do you need to know how far in the distance I can see? Do you need to know, like, if you can go in strobe lights? Are we going to go somewhere with strobe lights? Then that is then an applicable, respectful question. Hey, Olivia, we're going to be going to a club tonight. I wanted to know if that environment is safe for you. Is that okay? Yes or no? Okay, cool. Emily, like, I know you have a sight impairment or a vision disability or however you want to say it. Um, what is the best way I can send you documents so they're accessible? That is a perfectly respectful question. Whereas a lot of people go to joking around, like, how many fingers am I holding up? Because they want to know how much I can and can't see because I do have sight, but they don't know how to ask the respectful question. And it doesn't matter. Unless it's important to whatever you're doing with that person. If it's an activity outside of work, if it's work, whatever the case may be. If you're just curious, don't ask the question. If you're just wanting to know, don't ask the question. If it's like, hey, Emily, we're going to be walking to lunch together. Do you want me to guide you? Do does your dog follow command? Like, what? How can we get to lunch best together? Great. I'll just tell you, I'm cool. I'm good. I got this. Like, but if it's just for curiosity's sake, I say don't ask, leave the person alone. We get asked enough questions every single day that just to have a normal conversation that doesn't include our disability is really nice. And then, yes, also don't make assumptions. Making assumptions can get you in a lot of trouble and can piss a lot of people off very quickly. For me, I tell everyone the one that really makes me angry is when you say, "Oh, Emily, you can't see this, but over there is blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, you don't know what I can and can't see. Don't tell me what I can and can't see. You're going to make me real angry real fast telling me what I can and can't see. And because you're telling me what I can't see versus asking me. And that's the big difference. People are like, oh, but you said you're open about talking about things. Yes, but don't tell me what you think I can and can't see. And so that's, I think, yeah, like you said, don't assume, ask questions when they're relevant, not when you're just curious. And most likely, if you get to know the human, again, Olivia's going to tell you, well, I can't go in strobe lights, or Emily's going to tell you, what I can and can't see, or what I can and can't do, because you're getting to know us, and that is part of us. And when it's appropriate for it to come out, it will.
And I love how you really highlighted, and now I want to highlight it even more of like, ask what you need to ask and don't just like ask to ask. And I think that's really important because to you, it might be like, oh, it's fun to ask. Like, I'm just curious. I want to know. But at least for myself and Emily, I like to know for you, like, and you kind of touched upon this, is once we get to know each other, I'll probably tell you. Like, I'm not someone who shies away or goes, oh, this conversation's off limits. Oh, trust me, I'll tell you like as much as you want to know, but let me do it on my time when I feel comfortable to share certain things. When I go to restaurants, the thing that initially triggered my seizures when I was really young was a allergic reaction to Parmesan cheese.
Oh, okay.
In my pasta. Now I eat Caesar salad like it's no tomorrow. 9 times out of 10, that'll never bother me. But you cook Parmesan cheese in anything, and within moments, like to this day, and I don't have active seizures, I will go, okay, I'm feeling different. And I can feel like, because I don't have seizures anymore, but I had to train to try to stop them before they happen.
Okay.
My body knows when it's getting to that point and it's trying to fight it. But I know this, like within a minute of biting into something with Parmesan cheese, and let's say I've taken 3 bites in that time, I know that even though it wasn't visible, there had to have been in it. And a lot of people go to me when I bite into something, or I go to a waitress or waiter, I can't have Parmesan cheese in that pasta. Like, please make sure that doesn't go in it. People that don't know me well enough will go, or they do and they just don't think. They go, well, you eat Caesar salad all the time. There's Parmesan cheese in Caesar salad. And I go, but it's cooked differently. And
yeah.
There's a difference into it, and I can't fully explain it. My neurologist could probably explain it. It's something where I go, I know there's Parmesan cheese and Caesar salad. I understand, but I've been at a table where I didn't know it was in the food, and I ate for a few minutes, and we'll use post-COVID as the example of my taste and smell. I still haven't fully gotten it back. And so I have eaten for a few minutes, and then I'm sitting there and I'm like grabbing the table because I'm like, I've now eaten a lot of this. Yeah. And my body's now taking over, and I'm in this fight mode where I haven't had seizures in a really long time, 10 plus years, but I know that my body's reacting to something right now.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there and I'm going, okay, I might have to like sit on the floor. And they're like, what's going on? And I was like, I'm pretty sure there was Parmesan cheese. And the waiter will walk over and they're like, was there Parmesan cheese in this? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, great. And like, I just need a few minutes.
Yeah.
But it's sometimes that, like, I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I know there's differentials and it might be the same ingredients, but it comes in two different forms. But like, I'm letting you know this is the issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And here's where the issue lays, and this is what you need to know. You don't need me to dissect for you why I can, right before that, order a Caesar salad. Like, that's not the problem. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And you know what you can and can't have, and you know what you can and can't do. And people just have to trust that and they don't have to understand it. And that's hard for folks. And so, yeah, it's just what it is.
How do you, when you go through your training and you're towards the end, or even when it comes up in real time with corporations, what, you know what? I'm going to rephrase this. When you talk to corporations who go, oh, we work really well incorporating disabilities into everything we're doing and being mindful of that.
Sure.
How do you have those discussions of, are you really?
I usually ask more questions. Okay, what does that look like to you? Or I can ask some probing questions about what they've done that around, like, let's say, like one of the big ones is like, oh, we do an employee survey every year. And I say, okay, and what disability related questions are you asking in that survey? And they're like, oh, just, the basics, like, do you have a disability or not? And I'm like, is that it? Like, what else are we asking? And so it's, if I would say for the majority of the people who are like, oh yeah, we're totally welcoming to people with disabilities, that's usually the people who are think they are, but they haven't looked at their HR application system. They haven't looked at their hiring panels. They haven't looked at their internal demographics of how many people have disabilities. And they have not, looked at employee resource groups, but they just assume that they're welcoming to people with disabilities. And maybe the one or two people who have accommodations, they've been nice about accommodating. And that's usually what that looks like. The sad thing is the majority of companies I work with, and that's the majority of companies, not just that I work with, like we started with, diversity, equity, inclusion does not often include access. And so when I talk to a company, often they haven't even thought about disability other than from accommodations that somebody's requested. Internally, very rarely has anybody had a formal disability awareness training at work. And so that's, training has a really bad rap for the most part, but when you have zero foundation of disability, then you really can't start anywhere else except for training. And so that's why I do so much training. And then usually the consulting piece around, employee surveys, I administer employee surveys as third parties so that people feel safe enough to disclose their true demographics. That's the other piece. Is there enough trust in the organization to disclose your true identities? And that's not just disability, it's LGBTQIA plus, it's, any other demographic. It's hard to put that in your HR file. I advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion to not sit in the HR department. It should have its own department so that those files aren't shared. That helps build trust. Trust building is the big thing that we need to do inside organizations. And, with 1 in 4 is the technical number. I say it's more like 1 in 3 people in the US have a disability. And based on whether they identify as having it or not, or since COVID, and numbers have definitely increased of people with disabilities due to long COVID. Um, 1 in 3 people in the US have a disability, in my opinion. Let's go with 1 in 4. So there are more people inside the workplace than most companies know about that have disabilities, but they haven't disclosed, they haven't shared, they don't want to, they're afraid to. And maybe they don't need formal accommodations, but they do have disabilities they don't share with folks. So it's knowing their numbers, I guess, is one of the things, and then kind of building from there.
And I think that's a really important conversation to have is what does that actually look like to you? If you're sitting here and telling me you have this built out, what does that process? What does that department? What does that truly look like? And what have those conversations been to actually build that up? And I love how you mentioned the survey aspect, and you're like, well, we ask. Well,
Uh,
have you thought about what happens if you get the answer?
yeah,
Have
exactly.
you even thought that far ahead?
Well, and
Like,
the bottom line is unfortunately, we haven't done any of this accessibility work. No company has baked accessibility into their fabrics, because unless it started in the last 2 years, maybe, and it started by somebody with a disability. Very few companies have baked in accessible everything to their company. So if you haven't done a significant amount of work to make sure that this is part of your organization, you haven't even scratched the surface as far as communication, as far as accessible digital platforms, accessible spaces, accessible language, all of the things that we talk about inside of accessibility. If somebody in your organization, a leader, doesn't have a disability, most likely this hasn't even been scratched. The surface hasn't even been scratched. And so you pretty quickly if people are doing the work or not. So
and what would you say to an organization who wants to really go, oh, wait, this really sparked something in me as a business owner, as a leader, to really think about and evaluate what Emily has been saying today. What would sound of advice to kind of challenge their thinking or really how to approach the accessibility part? Because you are 100% right. When we talk about DEI, which has become such a thing in the last 7, 10 years of really diving into that aspect. And everyone is like, well, we have DEI. So, we're doing all these programmings and really becoming inclusive. But like you said, there's that big piece of accessibility that hasn't been included really up to this point until now people are speaking out about it, like yourself. So, what would you tell those individuals who are now starting to think about it, especially after our conversation today?
yeah, I think the two things are, don't make the first move of action running out and hiring a bunch of people with disabilities, because we haven't looked at your space. We haven't looked at your platforms. If you hire somebody with a disability and your company either, practically, as far as accessibility, software, those things aren't accessible, we're setting that person up for failure. As number one. But then also the internal culture, if you don't have many people disclosing that they have a disability, the internal culture is not ready to welcome that person as a human being, not a person with a disability. So we need to get your staff trained and look at your environment to make sure that things are accessible. I would love to be able to wave the magic wand and get everybody with a disability a job who wants one. But there's also work that needs to be done inside these organizations as we do that, so that we're setting people up for success. And this whole DEIA effort over the last 10 years has proven that people run out and hire people of color, run out and hire, LGBTQIA, but then they're treated like crap on the inside. And so we have to get the inside culture changing and shifting and welcoming before we bring a bunch of people in and then they quit because it sucks. And then the stigma and the reputation of folks with minority identities then is perpetuated. And again, then people look at minority community as flaky or not reliable or blah, 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 blah. And all these stereotypes continue because the work environment was awful to work in. So that's the other thing. And then if you do have people with disabilities that you've hired in the past, and you say, I hired somebody with a disability and they didn't do their job and they didn't do this and they didn't do that. Here's the deal. Like I've been saying this whole podcast, people with disabilities are humans. There are people with disabilities that suck. There are people with disabilities that are not hard workers. There are people with disabilities who are lazy, just as there are people without disabilities with all of those characteristics. Just because I'm advocating for people with disabilities does not mean every single one of them is a good fit for your organization. And you have to take that and compare it to able-bodied folks that are not meeting deadlines, who do not show up to work on time, who call out sick all the time, and I think there's this stigma around people with disabilities need to be perfect and people in order to prove themselves, because we are judged so much more harshly. And we have to keep those comparisons the same. Okay, how many times does Joe call out sick? And how many times does Emily call out sick? Oh, wait, that's about the same. Oh, wait, because they're humans. And we all call out sick. We all go on vacations, regardless of our identities. And I think that's the big thing. People, run out and hire a person with disability because Emily said they're going to be great workers and they're going to be loyal. For the most part, we have better outcomes than those without disabilities. But there are those who are going to meet human expectations, which are sucky sometimes.
I couldn't agree with you more on all of that. Emily, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, my website, purryco.com. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and I think that's LinkedIn. Either as Purry Consultants or Emily Purry. So would love to connect with you all.
Thank you, Emily, for all of your insight today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
And I truly enjoyed this conversation and being able to talk about just how much people with disabilities or that hit those disability qualifications, what it can really be like sometimes. And some of the things a lot of people have not talked about. For me, one thing we talked about today was my disclosure in previous jobs. And that has been something I've never mentioned before of like, I've never disclosed I've had epilepsy on paper. And so I think this has been a really important conversation to have, a conversation where you got two individuals that have disabilities really being able to openly talk about them and openly go, here's how to handle it. And Emily more than myself on telling you how to bring in the DEIA. And I think it was a great conversation. And a few of those key takeaways from today's conversation are: ask yourself, how would you treat any other human? So how would you treat a human is something Emily brought up. And I think it's really important to ask, instead of looking at them as someone who has a disability and that's how you identify them, how would you treat anyone else in a row, whether you knew they had a disability or not? What is your human instinct? Treat the person that way, as well as build the bridges with things people can relate to. When you start having conversations like Emily mentioned about surfing, being a parent, the ins and outs of everyday life, and you can connect on that level. And then you bring in the aspect of how to have conversations around disabilities, when to ask certain questions, or just the person in general. The perspective is quite different. So I think there needs to be that bridge of people being able to relate to each other as humans, like Emily said, instead of someone with a disability versus not having a disability. And once you really get to know the person, typically the person who doesn't have disabilities really doesn't care at that point. So really start at that point of getting to know them, as well as it is okay to screw up with terms around DEIA and come up with a way, though, to have that conversation, be comfortable with it, knowing like you might screw up a term, but also having the space to go, if I do, we can still work together, communicate, and know that I don't come from a offensive place, but also understand as a person, like Emily said, even when someone who has a disability, they might mess up on things. Like no one is perfect. As well as, um, do you need to know? This is probably one of my favorite things that Emily had mentioned. Do you really need to know the answer to that question? Is that really an appropriate time to ask? Or is it really none of your business? Ask yourself that before you ask someone a question, as well as 1 in 4 people have a disability. Think about that number. One way I equate stats like that is the people in your family. How many people are in your immediate family? The average American family is 4 people. So that means 1 person in every household has some form of a disability. When you think about it that way, that number becomes a lot more understandable and go, oh wait, this is a lot more normalized. This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Emily Purry. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.